is really critical. So thank you for that. And we're just going to move on to the next section, which is really about finding pain and healing pain. So thank you. So this here is our wagon wheel of pain, and this is something that, again, most of you on the call will have seen before. It's something that we have constructed, and it's based on many meetings with the end user community and the problems that they face. And I think for again, a lot of you will have heard this chat before, but the critical thing is the bit at the top of this wheel of pain is poor user experience, and historically that's where we've been in AV. I think most of you know our background, so we've come from a proprietary control system manufacturer with many installations delivered by that are maybe too complex, not as robust as they should be because they've been you know, coded by somebody that maybe wasn't as competent as they should be, and that ends up delivering a poor user experience. And if you then look at the back of that and say, you know, there is no methodology for managing these rooms, there's no platform to manage them, there's often no asset or inventory management, and then couple with that, if you take the modern environment where we've got this one changing demographic and also now the changing needs of the workplace, there is a real need to deliver a fantastic experience. One thing that most organizations don't have at the start of every budget year is additional support staff. I think we're seeing that is reduced, and using technology to provide this management is absolutely critical. And then, you know, lastly but not least is getting a great understanding of the utilization of these spaces and really bringing that data to the fore to make better decisions about what the spaces need to look like in the future, what your service management model needs to look like, and really how things are performing. So with that in mind, that's going to form the basis of our discussions with Elliot and Wayne. So I will just move forward and introduce. So if you'd like to join the party, Wayne and Elliot, that would be great. So just a little bit of background. Wayne's head of infrastructure for London Business School, and they deployed Utelogy, I think about 18 months ago. They're based in a wonderful part of London, just near Regent's Park, and have got some fantastic facilities, probably more mature students, but I think over this COVID period, obviously you've been fully operational, but in a very, very different way, and we can talk a little bit about what that looks like for you. Deutsche Bank as well have been you know, a partner of ours for a long time, if you like, an early adopter. They've really kicked the tires and tested the product and are now deploying it across their global estate. And we've got a big project, and you'll see some wonderful pictures there of Columbus Circle in New York. Very envious of anybody that works in that location. But yeah, I'd like to really put a few questions to both to Wayne and to Elliot. But I think, Elliot, initially, what do you think are the biggest challenges of running a global AV estate?
Jonathan. Okay, so you know, I think like many large organizations, we suffer with the same challenges. We have such a huge mix of technologies that we have to somehow try and understand and capture. We've got, as you say, new high-profile locations where we're defining new standards for our meeting room technologies, and we've got our legacy systems that we've had, you know, for almost a decade now, that are in some of our other satellite locations. What's fundamental, and you've mentioned it, and I'm nodding along as you've been talking, is the importance of the consistent user experience. And that's one of our major tenets, that we have to make sure that the user can go into any meeting room, feel confident that they can get that meeting operational, but they know exactly what they need to do. It's almost in an intuitive experience. They go into that room and they have to be able to start their meeting. And so we struggle. We have essentially pockets of systems capturing information about small aspects of that technology, be it the video conferencing solutions. We have over 2,500 video conferencing systems across our estate. They're capturing just a small aspect of that user experience and that room utilization, that room profile. We've got our legacy RMS system. So we have all of these areas capturing small bits of data, but we're not able to build that big picture. And then we can't present that information back to our stakeholders, be it corporate real estate or be it the heads of our end user computing division, to tell them how these rooms are being used, what we can do in terms of planning for the return to work and how we're going to start to reuse these spaces. And so that's, like everyone else, the fundamental challenge that we face.
That's really insightful, and from our point of view, and I guess from everyone on the call, that we've always thought that these things are how the data will be used, but from your point of view, to hear that is very real is obviously encouraging for all of us. And from you obviously alluded to the fact that you need more data because there are changes that are going to be made in the working environment, some of it caused by COVID. That lack of data obviously makes it quite difficult. The COVID period for you, Wayne, has been interesting because it's been business as usual, and you've kind of just had to turn your business around to be outward facing rather than inward facing. How's the Utelogy platform work for you in this challenging time?
Well, it's worked in several different aspects, to be honest for you. First of all, at the very beginning, as a school, we decided that we were going to do hybrid teaching. Now, hybrid teaching is quite challenging because we had to convert existing lecture theatres where all the equipment was effectively in the room, and if there was a problem, an engineer could go into the room and fix it, into a space where we've got people on Zoom in the classroom and people on Zoom anywhere in the world. So in the first instance, we had to work out, well, how can we recreate our spaces? How can we hook into what we've already got? So what Utelogy gave us the ability to do was to actually prototype very quickly. So we were able to hook into any of the equipment that we had that effectively was on the network, and then see and trial and get feedback from our faculty. I'll just share my screen just so that you can just see what we actually did to our lecture theatres. So this is one of our lecture theatres. It was actually the first day we did hybrid teaching on 21st of September last year. And we've had to incorporate extra equipment. So we've got ceiling microphones you see at the top there, you've got extra screens. Now, all of this equipment now is essential to the teaching. In the past, you would have a situation where, let's say the projector stopped working, they could have given some handouts to the students and they could have seen it. Now I've got half my students remote, we have to make sure that lecture theatre is working and all of those components are working, the sound, the video. So the next thing Utelogy has helped us do is to actually monitor that equipment. So we're doing room checks overnight using Utelogy, which tells us in the morning, okay, you might need to go and have a look at the microphone in this room or projector in this room. The next thing it's allowed us to do, and one of my guys, he's worked and learned how to put stuff together in Utelogy. We now have for our AV engineers a special tech page for each lecture theatre, and he's been able to draw together different elements. So we've got the an in-room camera that we can use to see the lecture theatre. We can access the switcher. We're using Zoom rooms. We can reboot the Zoom rooms PC. So those engineers now from home are actually able to fix something live in a lecture theatre. And that's actually an improvement on before, because before they would have to walk into the lecture theatre, perhaps speak to the professor, cause disruption. Now we have a facilitator may sort of raise a call to us, and we can fix it during the lecture, and the professor can just keep on teaching. So it's been very interesting. And then our next stage of hybrid is what we've just been talking about, hybrid meeting spaces. So we're going to have to rapidly move traditional meeting rooms into hybrid ones where people can be remote, and collecting the usage data and collecting the data of how rooms have been used in the past in that way, because we did used to use it that way. That's helping me build my business case, because I'm asking the CFO for a fair amount of money to go to the next stage.
I mean, that's fantastic, because that's, I mean, as much as we haven't enjoyed the COVID situation, it sort of highlighted, you know, some of the key benefits there, and I think it probably has accelerated people's sort of thought process about how we can manage this stuff better. You know, not being able to fly around the world or even move as efficiently from building to building has presented all sorts of problems. But with that, it's identified probably how inefficient things were in the past. And, you know, using technology to deliver this is pretty critical. I mean, Elliot, from your point of view, how do you currently approach AV service management? And, you know, we've obviously been talking about that in the previous session. And how do you plan in the future to deliver AV service management?
So again, we're quite conventional currently in the way that we're dealing with managing meeting rooms. Just as you've alluded to, we're still quite reactive, and the process, you know, of raising the ticket because the meeting rooms failed, and going through the ops and then sending a field engineer is still something that we've recognized, and we want to now move with the times. We're basing again the aspiration that the Utelogy platform can give us our hooks and feeds into our ServiceNow platform, which is our standard IT holistic platform, to be able to automatically generate that ticket, provide that notification, automate the process of getting somebody either remotely or as part of an automated process to investigate the state of that room, and potentially run those operational type activities outside of core business hours in that automated way. So I think it's important for us to make sure that our AV monitoring plugs into our standard IT platform, be it ServiceNow and Splunk, which are the two key solutions that we have, and that it's this, I suppose, full 360 environment where our AV systems are feeding directly into our IT platforms, but our IT platforms are also feeding back into our AV solutions, so that we can close out open tasks and issues in an automated fashion.
I think that's interesting, and I think the integration to the third-party platforms is something that obviously we've built into our platform. So, you know, getting that deployed and seeing how it's used is going to be really interesting. And I think, you know, one of the things, you know, we've talked about it, and you know, we've probably quite tediously talked about AV for an IT world and all of that stuff for a long time, but this is properly integrating, and it isn't AV equipment, it's AV, the process really into your world. And I think, you know, one of the things that we've seen is there is a move in the market away from proprietary solutions you know, to something that's more open. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Wayne. And I know you've deployed proprietary platforms in the past, and it'd be interesting to see if you think that's something that's going to continue, or where that's going to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the way it's going to go. So we've got lecture theatres that are using AMX. We've got ones that are using Crestron. We've got other solutions. So we're using Wolf Vision, which we're using Logitech pieces of equipment, and all of these platforms have their own monitoring service. But to expect, and as we add more and more complexity into the spaces, to expect the engineers to have to pick up alerts from a multitude of different monitoring services, you just can't do it. So if you've got a single pane of glass where you can say, I'm not interested in AMX, Crestron, Extron, Panasonic, I'm interested in that space. And if you break it down to, I'm interested, is that space operational or not? And if it's not operational, then I need to get someone there. That's a much more efficient way of doing it. You don't want to just have to check and, oh, I'm going to check to see if all of the AMX things are working. Now I'm going to check to see if all the Crestron things are working. It really shouldn't matter. And also that stops us, it helps us actually use the right technology for the right space, instead of thinking, well, we're using that manufacturer everywhere else, therefore we should try and shoehorn it into that space. It shouldn't matter. As long as you've got some technology that is intelligent enough to be able to have an API where you can query it, then it really shouldn't matter. You should be agnostic.
Yeah, I think I think there's been some barriers that have been created for the wrong reasons historically, haven't there? By putting all of your eggs in one manufacturer's basket and being limited by, you know, that product suite. But yeah, I think that the open architecture is something that seems to be prevailing now. And Elliot, from your point of view, because I know you've had, you know, probably a number of proprietary systems as well around the globe. What are your thoughts on that?
Again, I think what we're trying to do is, again, from the customer's point of view, we want the users to have the most flexibility as they use this space, and so that means that we have lots of different subsystems within meeting rooms. So we don't, just as Wayne has indicated, we don't want to have multiple different disparate systems that our operations teams have to constantly log into and monitor. We want to make sure that, you know, from an open standards point of view, we can collate that information and just have that available from a single source, and make sure that that information is readily available from an operations point of view, so that they can react accordingly.
Just a question, just a thought, and something what I was talking about earlier is the different stakeholders in your organisation. You know, I think your team's part of the multimedia group. How will you interface to the corporate real estate guys, and sort of bring in other technologies, maybe sensor technologies, people counting, even distance counting, and that sort of stuff now? Is that something you see as a possibility?
Yeah, so we have an initiative where our corporate real estate team are trying to define what they call a data lake of information that they're pulling from their building management systems. And that's a whole host of, you know, the standard building subsystems, HVAC, air conditioning, lighting, all of those PIR sensors. They're creating that heat map of those floors, feeding that information into this data lake, so that their systems can make that query and analysis for their use, but they're making that information available to us and expecting us also to feed in you know, video conferencing activity, what devices are the primary source that's being shared in the meeting room, to build up the profile of how those meeting rooms are being used. And so as we aggregate all of that information together, that's a much more rich data set for global real estate to make an assessment of how to evolve the floor utilization. And again, just to touch on the point that was raised, that the dramatic change in the design of our standard floors is coming into play now in preparation for our return to work, not only in our existing buildings, but even in our current new building in New York, but our future building in London, where we're going through a dramatic change in the significant increase in the number of meeting rooms that are going to be made available to people as they envisage the reason for being at that site is to do collaborative work inside the meeting room. And I think that's just an additional justification of the statements that Chris made earlier.
And what do you have any sort of percentage increases in that meeting room count or not?
So for the new Moorfields building, the meeting room count has gone from 130 to 178 meeting rooms. So that, whatever that percentage increase has changed, because they recognize that the density of people working at desks is not going to be there, but the reason for being on that floor, as I say, is that they want to work collaboratively in a cellular meeting room.
Interesting. And Wayne, obviously you don't have any students back yet. I don't know when they're coming back.
We do.
Oh, you do? Yeah, sorry, you've shown that. Yeah.
I've been teaching.
Yes.